Okay, everybody, it is that time, 3:30, and it looks like we have a lot of people here. I do want to make a couple of announcements before we do begin, please. First thing is, Sean Tonner will not be here. That's excused. He did call in. I'm sure Jim is on the way. He always is somewhere. James Eklund, so that's great. Jim Maris, I believe, is online, so we're doing good there. And I think that's about it at this point in time. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we do, let's take roll call, and we'll get that going from there. But before we take roll call, I want to point out to everybody, we have an absolute hard stop at 5 today. They have a function coming on in here. So when 5 o'clock comes, I mean, we need to be scoot booting it out the door here, okay? And we'll go from there, all right? And so with that, what I would like to do is, Marna, anybody else online?
We have Jim Morris online.
Okay, so we have
And
Jim Martin.
James.
And who?
James Eklund.
Oh, okay, good. So we're all counted for there. That's great. And at this point in time, I'm just going to have today make it easier. If you just go around and start with Harold, just please, you here or not?
Here.
Okay.
Are we sure? John Langley present? Let me check. John Langley present.
Jack Hilbert present.
Roger Hudson, City Councilman for Castle Pines, present.
Clark Hamelman present.
Evan Ela, present.
Tricia Bernhardt, present.
Fantastic. Okay. So with that, we can get started. So first thing with that is approval of minutes. Anybody have any changes, edits, or observations on the minutes? Seeing none, need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those that oppose, nay. And now I need any abstentions? None. Okay, we're good to go. So moving on to the next thing, we do have some referrals the commissioners would like comments on. And so I think we might have comments. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these for the heck of it one at a time and then allow each to, if you want to make comments on it or not, do so. The staff will gather those comments and get those to the commissioners so they can make a more informed decision. Okay, so with that, item number 1 is Ramblewood Plan Development. Anybody have any comments, questions, or concerns? Tricia?
Tricia Bernhardt. Same comment as I've made before. These two developments, actually, Ramblewood and Pinery, both cumulatively have roughly almost 200 acre-feet that they need per year for these new developments. I recognize that there are will-serve letters from the districts. However, I just want to point out again, a lot of those, the water use from those districts is groundwater. It would be nice to see the will-serve letters indicate how much groundwater is being used for these new developments versus renewable water. That is not included in the information, but that's my general comment for both Ramblewood and Pinery.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to make sure we don't miss one, and this is Kelty Road, excuse me. Anybody have any comments regarding Kelty? Yes, Harold?
Yes, I have a concern.
Harold, can you move up to the mic, please? We're not hearing you.
Yes, this is a project that's moving from a mineral use, almost a residential use, to a restaurant use or coffee shop. Those types of activities use a great deal of water because you're cleaning and washing. And this one is not connected to any type of municipal system, which means whatever's used cannot be reused. And so they're asking, as I understand it, I'm over my background here, but asking for an exception to the policy. I see no reason to grant the exception to the policy.
Any other comments? Tricia?
I do not oppose this. What they're asking for basically is a change from a residential well, it's an existing well, to using it for coffee. I I don't think it's a big deal. It's a tiny amount of water compared to all of the other water wells that are around that area, and they do not have the option to connect to any kind of a water district. Therefore, I have no opposition to that particular project.
Anybody else? I will say this, I don't drink coffee, I don't care. So there we go. Anyhow. Okay, with that, we have, go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, this is Evan Ela. I also have a comment on that, I guess. I agree with Tricia. I mean, they need to go through a state well permitting process to get an exempt commercial well, or to transform their residential well to an exempt commercial. But there's really no reason why they shouldn't be able to do that, unless the state finds that their demands are too high, but it doesn't appear they would be. So anyway, I have no reason to oppose that either.
Okay. Harold?
I have a follow-on question. If this isn't to be a problem with commercial activities on the wells, then why do we have a policy in the county? I don't understand. They're asking for an exception from a policy. What's the reason for the policy?
I'm not familiar enough, Harold, myself, regarding the policy, not to want to get into a policy debate, I'm sure, but I don't know when you're saying, I know there's a zoning change that's going to have to take place, which then drives the platting and the replatting of the land in a different manner. I would see that that could drive part of that, but I don't know on the water aspects. I'm sure that water usage requirements are different than commercial requirements. And so the answer is I couldn't do it. The question is, are they trying to be exempt from the water regs altogether?
Staff can explain what the policy is and what the exception is, and
Yeah, we do have someone. That's just an interesting
if I understood what
conversation.
the policy was.
Hi, Steve Coster for Planning Services. And so the requirement in the commercial zone district for central water and sewer, the idea is there will be, these districts would be, home of more intense uses. One thing that these didn't always have was, it wasn't always this way for these districts. The regulations from the 80s, which is about the era that this land was rezoned, at that time didn't require quite so strictly a central system. It wanted you to have one, but it was a little bit looser as to what you could have. That's been tightened down then since then, but those zoning decisions made for like Franktown have stood. And so people have zoning and there's no central water in that area, and there is nobody working really on plans to bring central water to that area. So we've done in other parts of the county where that situation is prevalent, we've actually done what's called the Interim Water and Sanitation Overlay District, where we've put in some policies into our zoning regulations to on a more programmatic level, allow exceptions to this rule, recognizing that the requirement was put in place without necessarily ensuring that there was a way for it to be met, even though these zone districts were already in place. And so that hasn't been done in the Franktown area. The Franktown area is a little bit smaller. And so we've had businesses coming in more on a case-by-case basis in the Franktown area and saying, look, we've been zoned this way for a very long time. A lot of the properties have existing uses that date back to the 80s, date back to when it was first zoned. And we're not able to meet this requirement, but we think we can demonstrate that we've got a low enough water use that it's okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have no objection to the concept of what the people are trying to do. It's just, it seems if we have a policy, it's got to make sense, so maybe we need to look at the policy. Because that's where I'm coming from. I don't object to what the people want to do, and I understand the issue, but we have a policy, and if we manage it with exceptions in certain ways, then for heaven's sakes, let's define it. Give some certainty to it. Or enforce it, one or the other.
Well, I do have a question, and now we're going to get into a land use sidebar here, and I just prefer not to go down that road. But I believe there are processes that any applicant can ask for exceptions and uses and special use exemptions. So as a result of that, if they require and if they ask for them, we have processes in our policies, in our regulations that allow them to ask. And if they're allowed to ask, then the staff would address, and so would they. So I think that's where that would head down. So there is a process in reality. The process is you're allowed to ask. Any other questions? Okay, so please, I would just like to direct staff, please capture those comments and get them to the commissioners and let them know what the different commissioners and board members' thoughts are on these different applications. That would be great. Thank you.
The Pinery?
Pardon?
The Pinery?
Okay, we'll pull that one up. I'm sorry, she pulled that. You're correct. And Pinery Meadows preliminary plan is the third and final one. Thank you, Roger.
No, I appreciate it. First of all, I'd like to address the Kelty, just the debate that we're having. I love hearing that because it's the first one we've really debated about, so I really appreciate all the opinions on it. I do think it demonstrates what my concern was originally when the commissioners asked us to weigh in on these issues. There has been no staff presentation. We've not been exposed to any of the public comment. I've read none of the ordinances we're talking about here. So to give an opinion that has any depth is really inappropriate for at least myself. I'm going to speak for myself. The reason I want to speak about the Pinery just a little bit is, of course, anything I say is just a veneer level. But I have been approached for the first time by residents, nearby residents, 3 to be exact, that have asked me to oppose this for the same reason Trish talked about it, the limited water resources in the area and the density of the planned project. But again, I want to stress that my objection from the original objection I had about us weighing in is still present, that I believe we should have a presentation before we give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a project of this significant value to a community. But I do want to recognize, the input from nearby residents. I think those are valid. So for that reason, I want to share that.
Great. And just, Roger, just to comment, make sure we're still level set here on that. There's really no vote here from the commission, so the board is not going to get a thumbs up, thumbs down, but they will get an individual eye shot of what each particular board member's comments would be and help them in the process of making their decision. So, okay? Yeah, I know it's still convoluted, but that's what that is. So we'll be talking about that again later here, I can tell you shortly. So, any other questions? Comments? Okay, looking at our agenda and moving on, we do have 3 items that, first off, I need to go to staff. Are there any other action items or anything else that we should be discussing, ma'am?
Katie, for staff, no. No other known discussion or action items.
Okay, great. Okay, informational items. We're going to be talking about today, we have 2, which are a legislative presentation from the Colorado Water Congress, which is going to be exciting, I think, to hear that. And then we're going to get a well monitoring presentation from USGS. I would just, once again, remind the commission, I'll be monitoring. 5 o'clock, we have a hard shut. Okay, so I'll try to make sure that we can get us to that. One thing, just as we just discussed, please keep in mind on these legislative items, we cannot make or will not be taking a vote of yes or no on a piece of legislation or a recommendation to take a position. What we do is we advise the commissioners on what we think is concerns about a legislation because they own the front door. I'm just going to say it again. They own the front door and they look out and anything to do with legislation, and I know they take positions on different legislation all the time. What we can do is make a recommendation to take a position, but we don't take a hard vote that says we voted no on that or yes or whatever, and we're encouraging the commissioners to do the same. We have to inform them the concerns we have about a piece of legislation and what it could mean. It's totally valid, and I'd love, and the discussion, I'm imagining we're gonna have some discussion about some of that, which will be great. Just like conversation we just had, it was a great discussion. So with that, I would like to have a presentation from Colorado Water Congress. Is anyone present?
Hi. Yeah.
Oh,
Hey, good
you're up
afternoon.
there.
This is,
Okay, they are online, great, okay. Please introduce yourselves.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I'm Diana Orff. This is Richard. We are contract lobbyists for the Colorado Water Congress. We've been working with them for about 12 years or so. And I know originally they asked Shanae Polo if she would handle this, and she is in Washington, D.C. today and knew that she would be gone. She asked us if we would take over and handle it for you. Your assistant, Lauren Pulver, did forward us your tracking sheet and indicated 4 bills that you were particularly interested in, highlighted in yellow. And so she suggested we focus on those and then be prepared to discuss any of the others on your tracking sheet that you might wish to bring up. Does that meet with your approval?
Yes, sorry, I had my mic off. Yes, that'll be great. Anybody have anything else regarding? No, move right ahead. What we'll do is we may interrupt you at time for a question maybe. But other than that, we look forward to it. Thank
Feel
you.
free.
And if, give me one
Okay.
moment, this is Katie for staff. To clarify, the list of bills that were provided to them are the county commissioners' list of bills that they've been tracking. Just wanted to clarify that for this body.
Hey, thank you very much. Why don't you go right ahead?
Great. Let me take the first here. Okay, the first bill that was highlighted was House Bill 1113, which was regulating the installation of turf in new developments. And this bill actually followed on previous legislation over 2 or 3 years, which first provided a grant program for removal of turf. And then last year, there was legislation to limit turf or to prohibit it in areas along public rights of way, what they called non-functional turf. That is turf that people don't use, essentially. They're not using it for playgrounds. They're not using it for sporting facilities, not using it for residential facilities.
Commercial structures.
Yeah, it was primarily focused on commercial structures and rights of ways and parking lots initially. This year, they decided they wanted to build upon that, and so the legislation moved to residential development. First of all, focusing on residential development of multifamily developments of units with more than 12 units, and then for 2028, moving forward to other residential development. It was somewhat controversial, I think, in its development because many local governments did not want to dictate to their citizens how to landscape their properties. We know that Castle Rock, for instance, has a very active program. I believe Aurora does. Many of the areas on the Front Range are particularly interested in limiting outdoor water use and trying to protect your water. But this, of course, this legislation was statewide. And so, as you can imagine, there was pretty broad-ranging discussion as the bill went through. It was very specific in that it did not prohibit any use of native plants, grasses that have been hybridized for arid conditions, or our low water grasses. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, we had a great presentation from a gentleman from Castle Rock on what they call Coloradoscape, showing some of the low water grasses and plants that can be used. It's quite informative and really appreciated that. This bill, though, as I said, generated a lot of discussion. It has actually gone completely through the process. It is on its way to the governor, which will probably take a week or so because the paperwork involved is fairly significant. But it did get passed by both House and Senate. The House approved the Senate amendments that were made. And I will say that by the time it was done, it has a pretty broad flexibility for communities to use their own judgment. It makes it clear that on or before January 1st, 2028, each local entity with land use planning and zoning authority shall enact or amend ordinances, resolutions, regulations, or other laws regarding new developments, regulating new developments projects, and, but makes it very clear that they can use their own standards or mechanisms by which they regulate those properties. So there's a great amount of flexibility there, and it's intended to be a measure that will actually work for local communities. As you know, we're a very strong local government state, and the sponsors tried to make it flexible enough that it would lower outdoor water use, but would allow enough flexibility that it was a functional measure that people could put to use.
The 2 points I want to underline here is that it's kind of a two-stage process. One is for multifamily residential, and then the next year, local governments with land use authority, which is one of the contentious pieces of who has land use authority, has to come up with single-family residential. It is a plan. All that's required is to come up with a plan. And the other historical piece of this building legislation over what is functional turf is what the definition of functional turf is. There's a lot of flexibility in this bill for that local government authority with land use authority to come up with how they want to proceed forward. It just requires a local government authority to come up with a plan. It doesn't require them to come up with anything specific.
So that is 1113 in a nutshell.
Well, can I ask you a couple questions and see if the board has any? So I get the local government, but then where does that leave HOAs?
HOAs were caught in the first part, which actually was last year, because it talks about common interest property in a community. So they would have been required to limit the use of non-functional turf within that HOA.
And when I'm talking about non-functional turf, that was fairly restricted in layman's terms to grass on medians. It wouldn't be front yards. It wouldn't be sports fields. It wouldn't be anywhere somebody has like picnics or parades, something like that. The term of functional use is what comes into that. If it's purely there for decoration, like on the inside of a median or strips on the sidewalks that aren't actually used for anything that humans would tread on, but it's simply decorative, that's the kind of layman's terms of what functional turf is.
Okay, so then local HOAs then would most likely have to work with their local municipality or the county in order to address how they would move forward with, because some of them are quite large and have extensive pieces, and some are still growing. So, and then there's going to be impact on that. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions on 1113?
And this is for new construction only, or does it have,
Yes, this,
okay, so most
This
HOAs
year-
are already in existence.
Correct.
So it would apply to a newly formed HOA, not an existing HOA.
New development. I would
New
stress that it's new
development,
development. So if you,
So basically, it's aimed at new construction.
Right.
From Castle
So,
Rock, I think it's
they're
good.
not,
yeah, what we ran
they're
into.
not asking people to hang out.
What we ran into with the HOAs in Parker on this bill from last year is that if they were making changes to existing medians and wanting to do construction updates, guess what? New laws apply. So that's what they were working with. They couldn't just automatically say, oh, we're going to do something else. So there were plans and they had to follow last year's bill in order to get that. And that's why I was just curious how that affected that. So, okay, it was a great input, Clark.
This
Roger?
legislation, this legislation was intended to build upon each year.
Right. And thank you for your presentation. I appreciate that. If I don't get a chance to say that throughout the rest of the bills that you're going to talk to us about. But mine is a philosophical just statement, not question. I have a problem with this. I worked in the legislature as the deputy chief of staff in the House for the House Republicans. I'm not sure why this is a state concern when it's really a local concern. It's like so many of the bills that we see now. I think local governments, and again, I speak because I am in a local government, but as a city councilman, I think local governments are able to regulate just fine. We know our cities, we know our HOAs, we know where our medians are. We drive past them every single day. I'm not sure Jared Polis has walked through my golf courses in down our city streets lately, although I could be mistaken. He could be coming to some of our awesome golf courses in Castle Pines. I think we're able to regulate those just fine in local governments in Douglas County. I don't think it's a state concern. So I'm not a big fan. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Okay, Harold?
Roger, I couldn't agree more. Local government, this is more of the state coming down on local government. And we've been seeing a lot of this, and we're seeing, frankly, at least in our area, local governments like Castle Rock work very well, thank you very much. And the state locks in these minimums, and then that becomes the minimum and kills creativity. So I just really hope that it's just a bad trend that the state starts dictating local land use. That's just more,
One size
I tend
fits
to be
all.
more philosophical with you because I think local government does a pretty good job.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, next bill, please.
The next bill up is House Bill 1120, which is a septic system replacement enterprise. Some background on this bill, and it's not quite through the process yet, and to be completely clear, it may not make it through the process. The problem this bill is trying to solve is a lot of these historic or old septic systems on individual property, especially in some of the mountain communities out there, are, frankly, too expensive for many individuals to replace. Some of these mountain communities, such as Clear Creek County, Summit County, and others that testified in the support of the bill are saying flatly that these are creating health, safety, and public welfare problems because the septic systems are leaking, obviously, into groundwater, but they're too expensive for the individual homeowners to replace. So what this bill is effectively trying to do is create a state enterprise that is would be a fee charged on all new septic system installs in order to create a fund that would then go to financial assistance for replacing old and outdated septic systems. This is it's a program that likely is going to be overtasked if it does end up coming into law, which isn't necessarily going to be. We heard up to 700 septic systems in a single county in 1 year. So of the problems that this bill is running into is just simply the size of that system. That being said, it is trying to solve a problem for individual homeowners that, again, with a health, safety, welfare issue of septic systems that are old and need to be updated or repaired or replaced, leaking into groundwater. Again, it does create an enterprise, which is outside of Tabor, that would be a system that is charging a fee on new installations in order to pay for older replacement systems. It also creates an enterprise that is governed by a board that would be determining how these funds are going out. And again, it has been languishing in House appropriations since its introduction, and with only 10 days left in the legislative session, 9.5 days left in the legislative session, it has a long way to go.
Anybody got any questions? This is going to be a good luck one. So, okay, the next bill, please.
Okay,
This is a big one, House Bill 1211.
oh, you want that one?
Yeah, I can start it. So House Bill 1211, to give you a little bit of background, tap fees have been coming up for Water Congress and other entities for at least 8-9 years, every couple of years. The background on tap fees with any water district, especially, is that a tap fee is charged, generally speaking, to handle infrastructure, especially for installation, and it's based on the cost of that infrastructure and under the philosophy of pay your own way. If you have a new development, a new house, a new housing complex, that they should be paying their full weight to join that system. And that's usually based on the size of the tap going in, like a 3/4 inch line for a single family residence. One of the larger issues when it comes to the state policy, especially the legislative policy intentions of trying to bring down the cost of affordable housing, is that in trying to acquire new taps into new developments, these tap fees can go in the tens of thousands of dollars, and that just goes right on to the cost of development. So what House Bill 1211 was trying to do is try to find a middle ground on where tap fees would go. Now, the bill specifically is only looking at Title 32 special water districts. That doesn't include special district. That doesn't include water districts within Title 31. Title 30, that means irrigation, water conservation, groundwater, public improvement districts, and municipals especially are not included in the bill. But the intention is this is the first successful bite of the apple to try to find some mitigation for the expensive tap fees to be reduced. The way the bill does that is it tries to create an allowance for not based on simply the cost of infrastructure, but say that tap fee should be reduced based on amount of irrigational space, lawns, whether that's water efficient utilities being put into a single family home, the square footage of a home or a residence that may be going in there. It's trying to find some middle ground where a Title 32 special district can try to lower that fee in anticipation of using less water. So the two purposes of the bill is to lower the cost to create more affordable housing, as well as to lower the amount of water impacts that go into that. Again, it only covers Title 32 districts. Diana?
Yeah, the next part, and the first time we saw this was several years ago when Water Congress was asked to support legislation that would allow basically no fees for affordable housing. They wanted very limited tap fees to be imposed on affordable housing on the western slope in one community. Of course, that was not possible for the water provider. You can't do that without injuring your other folks that you're serving. And it's been kind of a progression. There was a bill last year which said you have to show how you were developing your fees and provide any engineering background you can to show how they were determined. This year took existing case law and tried to show that your tap fees are reasonably related to the cost of providing the infrastructure. So it's incremental. What we have heard that there is high interest from the sponsor and others that at some point in the future, other water providers, in addition to the Title 32 special districts, will also be required to deal with variable tap fees. This, one of the sponsors made it very clear that he believed that the use of water systems, for instance, or other conservation measures, or that smaller residential units should pay a lower tap fee than somebody with a mega mansion, so to speak. So to reduce the tap fee based on the infrastructure, the amount of water you use, a little more tied to the things that you consider when you look at rate structures. So again, this is something, this bill is through the process. It's heading to the governor for signature, but I think the caveat is that other districts and other water providers will be pressured in the future to take this on.
And one final point before we certainly open up questions, because I know we tend to talk a lot, is that the bill also introduces certain concepts saying that if you have a development within the land area that a Title 32 special district water district has, that they are required to provide service to that zone. That's actually kind of where this bill had started off in form last year, was to say that if you are within the area of a Title 32 water district, that you must provide service if they're within that, if you have the ability to serve them. Those are two very, I hate using the term squishy, but that's where a lot of the circling on this bill ended up, because there were certain districts within the Front Range that had difficulty or were not able to serve people within their zones. And the one piece that Water Congress has always said as part of our guidelines is that you should never use water availability or water as a means to cease development or in order to impede development. Questions? Sorry, that was a lot.
Okay, any questions, comments? I do have a question. Is there a standard nexus formula that they're putting together for them to follow for some of these? Because what you're really talking about is developing a nexus by which they're going to have to present in order to get approval. And from what I'm hearing, is that everybody gets to develop their own nexus.
Actually, there in the bill, it sets out a number of factors to be considered, including the size of the property, the size of the unit that will be served, the capacity to serve. Do you have the physical infrastructure? Do you have to expand it? What is the cost of doing that? So you take all of those costs into account. What are any existing contracts you may have that would limit your ability to serve or to reduce those fees. So the bill itself is really detailed in the kind of factors that are considered.
Okay, great, thank you. Roger?
And I remember from my discussions about this originally when it was going to be no tap fees whatsoever from the affordable housing bill, and usually that means there is no free. It just means taxpayers are going to pick up the bill. Can you speak to me a little bit about, because I didn't understand this in the bill when I read it, creating an allowance. What does that look like? That they're creating an allowance. Do you know what that means?
I do not. I am sorry.
Yeah, I didn't
certainly
recognize
question.
what that meant. I'm assuming the legislature at some point is going to outline what that creation looks like, and then who's allowing and who's banking.
I don't think it has
Well, that's-
anything about that.
They just presented it.
Yeah, hang on a second, guys. So, any thoughts? Lobbyists, sorry.
Yeah, the allowance part of it, I cannot speak to.
Because
The,
Jim just said it. I couldn't find it.
Factors.
I'd
Yeah,
say it's in my notes.
the word allowance doesn't, yeah.
I think what was meant was the term allows the local provider to use appropriate factors to come up with a lower tap fee for certain types of development. There's no intention to create a fund or
I
something
understand,
like that.
but
yeah.
that allowance doesn't have to be an actual monetary. It's still a calculus to determine what those dollar figures are going to be. Is there math done? Is there some equation that's already been figured out?
Yes.
Have you seen it? I haven't seen it. It's not outlined in the bill.
I mean, it's based on the Breckenridge v. Krupps case that was decided years ago, which did establish that you had to have a nexus between the cost of service and what you charge for it in the wastewater context. And I think what was meant here is that we talked with the sponsor more than once. I was on a committee trying to work on this bill, and their point was, if you have multifamily residential, that they believe a smaller tap fee is appropriate than if you're a single-family residential. And so they tried to set out some factors that the local jurisdiction can use to justify a smaller tap fee. But the ultimate goal was to create smaller tap fees for multifamily or, higher density residential.
I understand that's the goal. Is that outlined in the bill? I didn't see it. Was the goal perhaps when they started? Is that what's going to the governor's desk?
There is no formula written into the bill.
It will have to be a test case.
Okay, that sounds expensive to me. Thanks.
Okay, great. Anybody else? And I think you had another bill you wanted to talk about.
At least a couple.
Yeah, there were 203 that was highlighted on the list. Actually, that was a very simple bill. It just is a clarification that for these small community grants, that 10% of the money in the grant will be used for administration purposes by the health department.
It must be out of the appropriation for that versus the whole cash fund.
So
It's a clarification to make sure that the amount being used for administration of 10% is going to the explicit appropriation for that fund.
So that one was pretty short.
Questions on that?
Okay, any questions? Okay, go again.
There was another bill that was mentioned when the material was transmitted to us, 1334, which I understand your group has opposed, the special district ability to exercise dominant eminent domain. And I will let you know that within the last hour and 15 minutes, that bill was killed in committee. There will be additional discussions over the interim to sort of hash out where people want to go to get legal clarification on that issue. But for now, we will not be dealing with it over the next 10 days.
Just a little background on that one is that there's a big question on what qualifies as dominant within dominant eminent domain, because there's only one definition currently in statute, and certainly not one when it comes to water infrastructure. So the bill was intending on looking at both state and home rule properties. There will be a large stakeholder meeting and discussions going on over the interim as hosted by the Special District Association. But as Diana said in the last hour, that bill was PI'd at the request of the sponsor and the proponents of the bill so that we can move forward with these discussions.
Okay, yes, Harold?
Questions on that?
Bill is particularly important. Frankly, we were involved in what caused it is an attempt to condemn a very small strip of land full of weeds but that stood between us and getting to the Platte River for an intake and discharge to solve the problems down at Levere's. Denver brought this bill up saying that the concern was that special districts could condemn their infrastructure. Now, this is a strip of weeds with no infrastructure in it whatsoever. It was kind of a trial by ambush. It was brought at the last minute. No one knew what it was about. They've yet to define what the problem is. They were able to take advantage of some home rule towns and cities thinking that this gives you great power because no one can now condemn your infrastructure. Well, you can't do it anyway. But if you're running a pipeline, say that you run through a home rule county or town or district across the state, you've got to deal with this.
Yeah.
And it's a horrible piece of legislation, and they have yet to define what the problem was. Because, Evan, you brought this up in that special district meeting. In order to get condemnation, you've got to prove you have a need and that it's not being used by the other district. In our case, this was a piece of ground that Denver had condemned about 100 years ago. And Denver being the largest landowner and second largest landowner in the state, this would lock out all of Denver's assets as a home rule city from any other community like ours who just wants an easement across the vacant ground. So my recommendation to our commissioners would be that we oppose it, which they did, thank you very much, and that until we know what the problem is, this is a solution in search of a problem, that we remain opposed, and that our comments be that, what's the problem? What is it? You know, and I said in the special district, this is one of those how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, kind of an argument that law schools like to have, and that's what it was. So my strong recommendation is this a bunch of nonsense. And until we know what the problem is, let's don't go looking for a solution. That's my recommendation.
Okay.
Other than that, I don't feel strongly.
Any other comments? All right. Anything else?
There are a couple of new bills we were going to mention to you, just so you could be on the lookout and continue to think about them. One is Senate Bill 305, which sets out some procedures for the health department to undertake to get permits for discharges out the door more quickly. I'm sure that you're all aware of the problems with getting permits from the health department for water, treatment plants, et cetera. This bill is very prescriptive on what the health department needs to do to improve that process, and it ties it to their funding through the budget. So this is trying to move things along. It was introduced very quickly last week, got through the Senate in about 3 days, and will be moving over to the House. So this could be considered good news for everyone.
There are two interesting provisions of this. One is that it allows for, with the consent of a permittee and the health department, to use a contractor in order to process that permit, although the amount of the cost of that third-party contractor in order to process that permit is open to question. It has to be agreed to by all parties, but those can get very expensive. But given the backlog right now of permits from the Water Quality Control Division, that's seen as another kind of tool in the toolbox in order to move these processes forward. This bill is probably not going to see many, if any, amendments. It's already through the Senate process, as Diana said, and it should move for the House very quickly.
Okay, any questions? Yeah, Mickey?
On that one, we've been working on it. the bill itself is not going to resolve all the issues with permitting. There's a regulatory process that's going to take place in the fall, which hopefully will pick up some of the more important pieces of this. But the bill's a good start at least, so something for all of us to keep watching.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
you're talking about the fee regulations, correct?
any other questions? Okay, you had a, continue.
Yeah, one last one we did want to highlight involves a study on the use of the state trust lands,
House Bill 1332.
which you may hopefully are aware of. This is section 16 and 36. In every township, these are lands that were ceded to the state at the time of statehood from the federal government to fund the public schools. This calls for a study of the use of those lands. Hasn't been studied in probably 25 years. There are some concerns that have arisen, and I let Richard cover the rest of it.
Largely what this bill is set out to do is create basically a board that will sit there and look at future uses of state land board lands. One of the provisions from Article 9 of the state constitution says this really does need to have a consistent and kind of a higher purpose in order to raise revenue. What the bill seems to be kind of frankly looking at is trying to expand those uses for highest and best usage of the land as things like recreation, layered uses such as agriculture, while still respecting existing current leases for agriculture, mineral extraction, et cetera. But what the board is trying to do is basically try to look at future usages. The bill has already seen some significant amendments. It has some other amendments coming onto it to expand out that board and have more ability for the legislature and the governor's office to appoint members to look at that board and how it's using. General agriculture stakeholders are fairly, I wouldn't say happy, but content with the amendments they've been getting on there to recognize the importance of agricultural uses of state land board lands. We understand that oil and gas and other extractive interests also have some amendment language coming forward to kind of recognize the historic and regional uses of that. We do understand that organizations like CCI and some other local government groups are kind of adding their +1 to some of that amendment language there. But again, the board is looking at those future uses, and there's some concern there that especially as the state is dealing with revenue questions on making sure that state land board land is coming to beneficial use, and even if it's being used for things like conservation, that it won't just go fallow, it won't just be neglected. So that's just wanted to give you a big heads up on that one because it's being actively debated. It has not heard its first committee. That will likely be tomorrow.
Okay, any questions on this one? All right, anything else? Listen, as the chair.
We've exhausted our time.
This has been wonderful. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day and for sharing this information with us. And it's really, really appreciated. Any board members have any closing remarks or anything you'd like to make? I think we can have that discussion. But I think what they would do is just grab our comments based upon what we said here, which is what we've done in the past. So I think that's probably the better thing that we would have be going forward. Yeah, Roger?
I just really want to say thank you once again. I know what these last days are like. That you're standing or at least upright is kind of amazing. There were days I wasn't. So thank you for all that you're doing for the people of Douglas County and advocating positions for us. And it's a thankless job many days. So thank you. And I hope on the 9th you can have a good meal and a good night's sleep. So thanks. I appreciate it.
Please reach out to us if you have any additional questions. We're kind of over time on that, and there's a whole bunch of legislation this year, so please feel free to reach out to us with any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you again, once again for your time. It's been fantastic. Appreciate it. Okay, so
We'll sign off.
I know we just have to understand the way that we function. I think the issue is that we have several comments, and thank those board members who've made comments. Now, I just got to ask staff a question. So those comments are typically documented and passed on to the board through your meetings and stuff, or how are those comments passed on?
The comments of this meeting will be recorded in the minutes. We can make sure that the board knows that those minutes are there. We formally pass along the referral comments as we're directed based on the board direction to the Water Commission.
Okay. So Can we just, on this one, I think that I'm getting the feeling several comments were made regarding some of the legislation that we can pass on for their edification as to what kind of positioning they want to take on legislative items, at least what the commissioners felt they should consider.
And Katie, for staff, again, what we can do is summarize the minutes and the conversation and forward them along as kind of a work session item, informational item to the county commissioners, and send them a memo based on that.
Yeah, because I would like to honor that. Yeah, that would be good if we did that. Any other questions?
Pass those on, because, but one of the things that's important to our county is the cost of tap fees. And what this legislation does is it allocates part of those tap fees to existing residents. Now, they say it doesn't, but it will. We all know that's what's going to happen, because if you reduce it at one end, you got to pick it up somewhere else. The real issue is the cost of water and sewer. That's the issue. You know, when I was a young man in banking, one of the first projects I worked on was the Salt River project in Phoenix, and we financed that and made a lot of money on municipal bonds. We don't have that in Colorado. We don't have any support or major projects to bring water to our state or to capture it and reuse it. And that's the real problem. I don't have a solution, but I think we're working at the wrong end of the problem, which is the consumers using it rather than the front end of the problem of the cost of the water supply and the cost of sewer treatment coming in. And anything we as a county can do to help our state focus on those two issues, and they're both important, as Douglas County is the first county that I know of who's gone to total reuse. All the major water providers, as soon as our sewer plant's done, we will use every drop of water to extinction. The biggest enemy you have is the Water Quality Control Commission, who is 4 and 5 years behind issuing permits. But it's okay because they don't know what the rules are, so I guess it's okay. And I think the more we can help, I think PCWA is having these problems, I think we all are. The more our commissioners can work on streamlining the process for total reuse of every drop of water, and then second, getting our state getting real on bringing major water projects to fruition to lower the cost for everybody is going to be important. That's just one person's recommendation.
Right. Clark?
Yeah, I just want to add a comment. Most of these issues are important to our water providers and to our county, but I agree 100% with what Roger said. We really don't need the state's help in figuring out the best solutions. You know, we're dealing with these issues. We're, I think, dealing with them. Part of the reason we're here is to deal with those issues. And you know, the more state direction we get, all that really does is just limit our ability to deal with them in a way that is local and effective. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
But,
but I guess they think we need lots of help.
Harold? Yeah.
Dealt with it.
yeah,
Hasn't what?
hasn't dealt with
The
it.
state hasn't dealt with it. Or they haven't facilitated others dealing with it, so now they want to dictate it, like coming down. And
Okay. With that, I think we are closing the legislative portion at this point in time, unless someone else has any comments. And now we're going to move on to our USGS presentation.
All right. Hi, my name is Kelly Palka. I work with the U.S. Geological Survey in Lakewood, Colorado. I have Courtney Ambrose here with me, my colleague who also works on this project, and our supervisor, Megan Bell. Thank you all for having us here today. So I'm going to go over the Douglas County Groundwater Network project. I'll talk about a little behind the project, what what actually happens, how we get the data, what the current groundwater network looks like, as well as the work that has been done before with the USGS. So we get groundwater levels in Douglas County. We have two different measurement types that we collect. One's called discrete, another type is called continuous. The discrete water level has us going on to the site and getting a, let's see, yeah, use the mouse as a pointer, putting in this fancy measuring tape down into the well. And so, oh, yep, sorry about that. So we lower this fancy measuring tape into the well, and it has a probe at the end that will sound when it hits the water level. And so once that sounds, we'll pull that tape to what we call a measuring point, and that measuring point has been surveyed in by equipment, and from there we can get the depth to water from that measuring point. So that is our discrete measurement. The other type that I mentioned is a continuous. So some sites have been selected to have equipment in them that has a pressure sensor. And so that pressure sensor is lowered into the water column, and we calibrate it so that it records the accurate depth to water measurement, and all the water levels are corrected to a groundwater elevation relative to the land surface. So in this diagram up here, it kind of represents what you're seeing in the picture below. So we take that measuring tape, we lower it to the water level, it beeps, we stop and put it up next to the measuring point, and we get that depth of water from the measuring point, and we subtract whatever that height is above the land surface datum, and you get groundwater elevations. Some of the things that we run into, so one of the important parts of this is making sure we get a static water level. So that's just a water level that isn't pumping at the time during our visit. Because if we get a pumping water level, it's not really representative of that current aquifer condition in that well. Typically, we'll call homeowners about a week ahead of time, sometimes a couple days, and just let them know when we'll be on site, give them an hour range. But if we do get a pumping water level, those data are excluded from trends and analysis. So other things that we've come across is just property access. Sometimes folks have gates, and we forget to coordinate unlocking those gates. More in 2021 and 22, we saw a lot of home selling, and so I think we had about 6 sell in like a couple years. So we had new property owners, and they unfortunately did not want to continue being in the network. And one of the biggest issues that we've run into is equipment changes. So in that last slide I showed you, it's called an E-tape, and it's a more recent piece of equipment, and another type that we use is a steel tape. So the difference is the steel tape can access some of the wellheads that look like this photo here. And so if you look over here where my mouse is at, that's the access port. So the E-tape, although small, is about pin width, sometimes isn't thin enough to get into those access ports, so we can't get that data, and steel tapes are no longer manufactured. So that's something that unfortunately has cut down the network. Yeah. Yes, we have coordinated with the homeowners, knocked on doors, and gotten written permissions to visit them. We do not. We will not enter anywhere that we do not have permission. They're very friendly.
Let's make sure we speak into the mic, okay, so everybody can hear. Harold, I'm sorry. Yeah. Put it in your lap. There you go.
Oh, I was just asking the authority to go in on property to measure this, and the answer is no. So you have to have landowner cooperation. So one of our challenges should be to get to all of our residents in the rural water and elsewhere to please cooperate, because we need the data.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you.
We have a very friendly network, I will say that. But this figure here shows some of the issues with having all that pumping data. So it shows all of these discrete measurements. If it's a triangle, it was pumping. If it's a circle, it was a static measurement, so not pumping at the time during visit. And you can kind of tell it's hard to get sort of a pattern out of this data. So that's the issue we run into with pumping. Once we collect that data, all of it's uploaded to our website. It's the National Water Information System. We call it NWIS. And all of this data is publicly available. Anyone can search it. It's got a link included in here, and so all these red dots are wells. And so you can zoom in and click on a well and get all the field measurement data that we've collected, including the continuous.
Can I make a clarifying question here?
Yeah.
When you say wells, these are wells that are in operation from, these aren't USGS wells.
These are wells in cooperation with USGS.
So let me clarify this a little more. You're getting measurements from all those red dots.
Yes.
How often?
All of them are pretty variable. I mean, there are some in there that will have, so anytime that we've visited a well, we'll get property access and agreement. And some of them will just have a couple measurements, one measurement. Some of them will have hundreds of measurements. So it's just depends on the project itself.
And that's over time, right?
Pardon?
When you say measurement, like one, that's not one a year, that's like, or,
Yeah, one from the beginning of whenever that
okay,
well was entered into our network or
Okay.
our system.
great, thank you.
So the Douglas County Groundwater Network began in 2011 between the USGS and the Rural Water Authority of Douglas County to look at the groundwater resources of the Denver Basin bedrock aquifers in Douglas County. We have 21 wells currently. As I mentioned before, because of some property changes, access stuff, we used to have 36, but currently we have 21. There are 6 in the Upper Dawson, and of those, 4 are those continuous sites, so they all have loggers in them. 7 in the Lower Dawson Aquifer with 2 continuous sites, 6 in the Denver Aquifer with 2 continuous sites, and 2 in the Arapahoe Aquifer. We've somewhat recently lost the 2 that we had in Laramie Fox Hills within the last couple of years. So it was the same homeowner who had 2 different wells, but we still had pretty good data from those 2 wells.
So clarification again,
Yeah.
this is a specific project.
Right.
So all those red dots, those wells are included in all those red dots.
Yeah, these wells would be on our INWIS website, and you could zoom in on them and see the data.
Okay, thank you.
This is a diagram of the Denver Basin bedrock aquifers. Although part of it goes through Douglas, you can see that it's got pretty wide extent. It's about 7,000 square miles. It goes as far north as Weld County and as far south as El Paso. So the bedrock aquifers, there's 4 primary ones. They're in a synclinal, so a bowl-like shape, and it goes oldest to youngest deposit. So the oldest being the Laramie Fox Hills, and the youngest being the Dawson. In the outer extents where you see the deposits here propagating out, that's where they're the shallowest, and so you'd have the Laramie Fox Hills, this green color right here. It is underneath this, but that's where it'd be the deepest. And so even though it's not showing here, it's not outcropping on that surface. And so this is Douglas County. So you can see it contains most of those 4 aquifers. So the upper one, Dawson, then you have the Arapahoe, Denver, and Laramie Fox Hills. Like I said, the USGS has been collecting discrete and continuous water level data in Douglas County since 2011. From those data, we were able to produce 2 scientific investigation reports, SIRs, published in 2014 and 2020. The first 2014 SIR concluded that there was a pattern in declining water levels. They didn't do a trend analysis during that report, but there was an analysis looking at first measurements to most recent measurements and saw that those levels were going down. In 2020, we did an SIR that analyzed the trends from 2011 to 2019, which also indicated water levels were overall declining. And just to look at that, this is a figure and a table from that SIR. It shows the triangles are the sites that had trends. And so if the triangles are facing down, that's a downward trend. If it's going up, that's an upward trend. So LDA 11 was the only one with an upward trend. The size of the triangles also correlates with the magnitude of the trend itself. And then this table shows here what those trends were, with the greatest being about 5.5 feet at the Denver 8 well, which should be down here, and some of the smaller being about 0.25 feet a year. So trends were for feet per year. And these are,
I'm going to apologize, but can you go back to that table? Can you just take one line and explain a reading to us? I'm
Oh,
trying
yeah.
to read this and I'm not understanding it.
sorry about that, yeah. So in this column here, you have the different wells. Tau and a p-value are statistical measurements. So tau says how strong the trend is, and the p-value says whether it's a statistical trend. And so if the p-value is below a certain number, that means that the data indicate that there is a trend there, whether it's up or down. If the p-value is above a certain value, it means the data doesn't indicate a trend. And then in this column is the what those came out to in feet per year.
Oh, so if I see minus 0.31 on LDAW7 as an example, third one, that is 1/3 of a foot, or what is that?
Yes, that means it's about a third of a foot decrease per year in that water
Great,
level.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
But are these all the wells in Douglas County that you are monitoring?
Microphones?
These are all of the Douglas County wells in your system.
Yeah, so these are all the wells. However, not all the wells had statistically significant trends, so those were not included in this table. But you can see them on the figure here, so if they just have a dot, they're still there and they were analyzed. However, the data didn't indicate a trend. So not good, or not low enough p-values. So I took those wells, and we have, like I said, all that data publicly available on our NWIS website, and we just plotted that data up from first measurements to now, and I plotted the ones that had those statistically significant trends from the 2020 SIR. These are the Upper Dawson aquifers, UDOT 3 and 9, and both of these indicated a declining trend in groundwater, so minus 0.25 feet and minus 0.21 feet per year. We have not done a trend analysis since that report, and I'm not making one now. However, you can see that from the first measurement done in 2011 to now in 2024, 2025, it is lower in both of these. And these figures here show a static is a circular point pumping triangle, and this red line is our continuous data. And just to note here, this was a 2-hour pumping event that happened at this well, so that's why you have this sharp decrease in the water level right there. But you can see too that these continuous loggers do help fill in gaps during times when the wells aren't able to be visited. In the Lower Dawson aquifer, you have the same thing. So that one well I said that had an increasing trend is indicated here. So this is LDOT 11, and that was going up about 0.71 feet per year. Yeah, Tricia.
That is actually my well. And I'll give you a quick analysis of what happened. My neighbor gave up on their Lower Dawson well, and they installed a Denver well, which was a much more expensive and deeper well. They use a tremendous amount of water. They have a very large house. I won't go into that, but nonetheless, the fact that they moved into a different aquifer formation created a definite benefit for my well. In addition, we installed rainwater collection systems and started irrigating our garden with rainwater and did some other water-saving techniques to see if we could get our well to increase its production. And there you have it. That's why we went up.
Impressive. I do have a question. That homeowner lives how far away?
The well was 650 feet away from our well,
So
so
that's how-
fairly close.
So, okay, so that's the coning effect of them drawing
Correct.
down on that. And that, oh, wow. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, LDOT 11, good to have a backstory on that one. The other wells did have points that were lower from the first measurement in 2011 to 2025. It's a similar pattern in the Denver aquifer as well, where we did have some higher trends. So this one, Denver 1, had negative 1.11 foot per year. And then these did not have continuous records. Just to note that That's what this red line is here. This is the other half of the Denver's aquifers that were analyzed. Denver 8 had the greatest decline in groundwater level trends at 5.5 feet per year. And you can see the points going down. It's the same pattern in all these where, not saying a trend analysis, but the points from the first measurement to current levels is much lower.
Question? Yeah, this, am I on? Yeah. Yeah, Don Langley. So the y-axis here is elevation, correct?
Correct.
Correct. So two questions then. Can you just kind of read out the elevation at the beginning and the elevation at the end, just to get a kind of a feeling of scale? I'm assuming if it's 1.1 foot per year, it's going to be 10 or 20 foot difference. Do you know the thickness of this aquifer at the location of these wells?
I'm not familiar with that last question. I know it's pretty variable, and Denver can be a little discontinuous in Douglas County. But we do have a table in that 2020 SAR that gives a range of that aquifer thickness. And so I'd be happy to share that link. Tricia's pulling it out now.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay, yeah, it has a table in there that should provide that range of aquifer thickness. And for your question, Denver 8 looks like 5,494 feet-ish to begin with, and now at the most recent visit, 5,490-ish. So 4 feet drop from 2011 to 2025.
Thank you.
Yeah, Evan, Ela, do you have a well log for each one of these wells?
We got our well logs from the state website, and that's where we get most of our information from.
So you could determine the aquifer thickness or the sand thickness on each of your wells. You just have to look at that log.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I believe they have well depth and hole depth, and then the aquifer that they're in on our website.
Okay.
And the last well that showed a trend in the Arapahoe was Arapahoe 1, and that had the second largest decline in water levels at 2.26 feet per year. So, Arapahoe, I can go back to this map. Arapahoe 1 is on the western side of Douglas County, where the aquifer extent is. It's up here.
In your development, Harold?
It's near you.
Well, we know there's no water under our development, that's why we went elsewhere. But everybody's on that Arapahoe. And how many wells in Arapahoe are you monitoring?
We had, oh, that's a good question, sorry. Just 2.
Doesn't seem like a lot of data points.
It's not.
Yeah.
So, Tricia Bernhardt again. It's not a lot of data points, and there are ways to get that information. Clearly, most of the districts keep that information. Castle Rock has that information and is willing to share it. But that's part of what we're doing this whole study for, is pulling that all together. So yes, there are only 2 wells in the Rural Water Authority program.
Yeah.
Evan, Ela again. But are you looking to recruit more wells to add into this system, or is this locked in? You want data integrity to stay with the same wells that you have?
Right, there's, if there's continued interest in the project, I think that there could be an increase in the well network if that's what's wanted. Definitely there is also use in having wells with a lot of historic data. So like if you noted from that first report that we did, the project started in 2011, and then the SIR was published in 2014, but it used data from 2012 to 2013. And so there wasn't a trend analysis done, because the longer you have data for, and the more data you have, the more substantial or the more statistically significant data that you'll get out of that. And so that's part of the benefit of having such a long-term project, but also potential to, if you increase the wells, then continue the study for at least a few years to get that trend analysis sussed out. And Tricia, I guess, beat me to the punch, but that was something that from the hydrographs we noted was there's a Denver 7 well, or Denver 3, sorry, just south of your well. And it was interesting to note that Denver 3 was decreasing while this Lower Dawson well was increasing. And we were wondering if it has anything to do with the complexities of overpumping in the area. I know there's a report done in 2011 by Suzanne Paschke, who noted that a lot of these aquifers, which are confined, so that just means they're under different pressure. So you have an impermeable layer above these aquifers, and so if you penetrate into that, the water level is going to be above that upper boundary of the aquifer. Whereas if you have unconfined aquifers and you penetrate them, the water level will be below the upper boundary of the aquifer because it's under different pressure. And so we were wondering, Suzanne noted that some of these confined aquifers were becoming unconfined aquifers due to overpumping. And so that was something we were curious here was Lower Dawson becoming an unconfined aquifer? And then also, I mean, so in the outer extents where these aquifers are exposed, they are typically more unconfined in characteristics. And so maybe it's getting recharged from some of these waters, these streams, whereas Denver, since it's a confined aquifer, is not seeing that recharge as instantaneously as that Lower Dawson aquifer. But just something to note for, the use of this data is you can look at it and get a bigger picture of what's happening in the aquifer rather than water levels are going up and down.
Evan, Ela again. So on each of your results where you're establishing a trend, are you demonstrating or at least stating whether it's unconfined or confined?
It's in the report whether or not they are, but there is no, I guess, true way to do that from the data that we collect.
Oh. Yeah, but it could be done if you had looked at the logs and the elevations of the sands and all that kind of stuff.
Potentially, yeah, but the logs, some of the logs are older and the pumping has changed some of the characteristics of these wells, so it'd be hard to know, even if when the well was drilled back in the 70s or whenever it was, if that's changed or not. And there are methods that we utilize that could indicate whether or not that's changed. There's something called groundwater age dating, so that'll tell you how long it takes groundwater to recharge an aquifer or move through the system, and that's usually pretty helpful for describing different aquifer conditions. But on that note, this data, is useful for getting a pulse on how the aquifers are doing and how different pumping and varying climates are affecting the wells themselves and the water levels. It can aid in long-term planning, see which areas are getting most affected by pumping and water usage. Also, results could be reapplied to that study I was mentioning by Suzanne Paschke in 2011. She used pumping rates, I believe, in early 2000s. And so if that, you can only speculate how much pumping's being done back in that time. And now that we have 20 years of actual accurate data, you can update the model and get a better sense of how much water is being drained and how much water is available in the aquifers. So. Any questions?
Okay, let's start off. Any questions? Excuse me, can we start off here? Any questions? Well, I'll kick it off. I do have a couple.
Sure.
So you have a limited project with, I think, involves 11 wells?
26 currently.
That's correct, 26, okay. But if we chose to do other projects that expanded that review and that search, and we would be recommending that we triple that, quadruple it. I can see when I just look at even in Tricia's example, that's literally a very minor amount of measuring that takes place in that area overall.
Right.
And so when I look up against the foothills, that's pretty open there. And then you go clear out to Cherry Creek Valley. There's a lot of wells out there. But my question to you is, what does it take to get or to understand or to analyze and say, okay, we want to get some absolute data from these areas and we would like 10 wells in each area. How do we approach you guys to say, do this project, and how does something like that, the cost of that determined?
Yeah, so it's, yeah, definitely looking at if you have areas you want to understand better and get more data in, then yeah, we can, we have a similar project in Elbert County. They have currently 32 wells, and so the beginning of that project did an analysis trying to find areas of concern. And so they did land use and pumping, and they looked at which areas to focus on for the county. And so it could be a similar approach to that, is trying to figure out which wells to target, and you want different aquifer representations, and obviously probably aquifers that are in more use. And yeah, then it would just be talking to homeowners. I mean, we kind of do it old-fashioned door-knocking style of talking to folks and getting permission and having backups and trying to create that network.
So I know it's gonna sound crazy, but it's like brown money. I know it's tax dollars here versus tax dollars there, but my question though again is there a fee for requesting a specific project, and how do we determine what that fee is? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, no, it would just be, I mean, you can, yeah. I'll step in. Yeah, supervisor.
Could you please come up to the mic? I'm sorry. Okay. And by the way, this is a warning. We have 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. I'll be quick. So I'm Megan Bell. I am the section chief of the Hydrologic Investigations Unit in Lakewood, so with the Colorado Water Science Center. So we really see the USGS, we're your partners, right? We partner with our local communities, and we start by saying, what are your questions, right? Because our job is to try to understand what scientific information you need to help you make the decisions on your water resources and what you're going to do. So that's our goal, is to work with you to understand what your question is. We don't want to, expand your well network by 30 more wells, but not be able to give you the information that you need. So it really starts with this conversation. What are your questions? Okay, what can we do to help you answer your questions? And essentially the cost part of it, we have to talk about, right? Because we are, USGS, the Water Science Centers, we're what are considered reimbursable. So we get a little bit of appropriated dollars, but not very much. We have cooperator matching funds that we can apply to projects. But for the most part, we are coming to you as your partners. We provide expertise, but funding comes primarily from you all, essentially.
Great. I think you've answered that question. Thank you.
Excellent.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Harold?
Wasn't one of the first actions taken by this commission to recommend the county commissioners allocate a certain amount of funds to continue this study? That was the first thing we did, and I think it was like 50,000 or some such number.
Yeah, it was about $60,000, and that money will go for a little bit while longer. It doesn't last that long. It'll go
No.
into probably next year.
That was one of the first things this commission did, was say we've got to have this data. So the question is, how much more do we need and what's it cost, right?
Well, and then the question is one more than that. What other areas should we be looking at that we're not looking at today?
Yeah.
And so it's a combination of issues, and I think it's a great question, Harold. I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to get to, was, because at some point, I think we're gonna have to make a request based on, do we really need that kind of data? Do we need that data? What kind of questions are we missing? What information don't we know? And this is why when we get the study back, it's gonna be important, because then we can pick out holes and say, okay, just what are the variables and the gaps and the differences? And then maybe we can contract with existing wells and homeowners to be able to do something like what's been done here. So that's why I was wondering.
Jack, I'll just, a reminder that this is just one avenue of collecting data for what Forest Glen and LRE are going to be doing. So they're going to be collecting data from all the sources that they can. There are others out there, and like I said, the districts, the municipalities, they have water information that they don't necessarily share, but that's going to be part of the challenge for LRE to pull that together. This is just another piece of what we have, and it's good because it's historical. We have many, many years of the data, which really should be helpful to the study.
Great, thank you. All right, any other questions? I don't have any. I can't thank you enough. This has been very, very informative. I really appreciate your time and for coming down and doing that, and for everything you guys do. Thank you so very much.
Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Yeah,
Very
thanks
good.
for having us.
Excellent. Okay, member discussion. Anything anybody wants to bring up, have a discussion, talk about? And I'm tired of hearing about Shadur Sanders, so don't talk about it, please. Anyhow. Okay, with that, I think we are adjourning with 4 minutes to spare. Thank you.